called battered wife syndrome. And many of our girls, even in Shraddha's case, we have seen that she was going through tough time with that boy, but still she was living with that person. It was because of that. They don't know that they have to go to a counselor, somebody and ask help. They don't know how to walk out of that relationship when they are beaten up, or they are harassed mentally or physically.
One other thing that we've noticed, ma'am, is that oftentimes these kinds of victims of such harsh abuse, they are secluded away from their family, from their friends. They have no support system of any kind. What are the signs that one needs to pick up if somebody happens to be living in an abusive relationship, there is physical violence and so on? What should one look out for?
In every relationship, it is very, very important that a person has support system, whether from family or friends, and share their problems to the persons they are close to. But in Indian society, especially women don't, share their problems outside a relationship. They think that they have to protect that relationship from outside world. And even if that is abusive relationship, they don't share. So first thing is, if you are feeling that somebody is abusing you, even verbally, you should walk out of this and share it with your friends. It is very important because they will give you a suggestion, and family also need to support their children.
All right.
If they are supporting, these kinds of things will not happen. Earlier also I said, and many people disagreed with me, which is okay. But families need to support their children, even if they are having a live-in relationship. In that way, I think they will be able to share if they are going through any problem.
Okay, Rekha Sharma, we'll leave it at that. We'll see how this story plays out. This is, of course, the latest in a series of very, very violent crimes, almost inhuman crimes, where not only is the victim, the woman in these cases, murdered, but also the body is disposed of in the most brutal of fashions. So let me go across to our guests who are joining us. Abha Singh, lawyer and activist, is on the panel this evening. Dr. Jayanti Datta is a clinical psychologist. T.R. Kakkar is former police commissioner with Delhi Police. And let's try and also see if we can get other guests in. But first, I want to go across to Abha Singh. You know, the depravity of this crime, it's not like there have not been, murders or harassment or anything that happens, between couples or between live-in partners. But to not just be able to kill your partner who you have known and lived in with for 5-10 years, but to cut up her pieces. In this instance, try to cook them off so that people are not suspicious. In the case of Aftab and Shraddha, take them in plastic bags and try to dispose them off in a forest. The depravity of these crimes, why is that the case? Why is that the case in recent times, Abha Singh?
Exactly, Zaka, it's really shocking. I mean, in this case, at least what some reports say, that he was feeding pieces of the parts of his live-in partner to dogs, because in the last 2-3 days he was feeding dogs, which he never did. So that is one issue. But if you see the NCRB figures, around 30,000 murders take place in India, which makes it to 82 murders every day. But such grotesque, depraved murders, I think, would be at least 20 to 30 per day, which is a very serious figure, which shows, and the conviction rate is barely 40%. I was listening to the NCW chairperson, and she says you should tell your friend that you are being harassed or walk out of a relationship. But how does one know what is happening in the mind? And the criminal justice system is dependent on the deterrence factor. And here I feel that there is no fear of the law. The manner in which they are cutting up body parts, keeping them inside the house, clearly shows that the neighborhood concept has broken down. The beat system of the local cop has broken down. There are no intelligence. And also what is important is that people know that the conviction rate is so poor that they will get away. Get a good lawyer and you can get away with even committing murder.
No, but Abha
so
Singh, the point about getting away with murder, low conviction rate, the legal system is lax, that comes at a much later stage. What I'm curious to know is, this has been going on for 3, 5, 10 years, both in this case as well as in the Aftab Shraddha case, they were again living in for 3 years. And obviously, this physical abuse was happening on a regular basis. Why don't these women who are financially independent, who have a mind of their own, why don't they not recognize that they're living with a psychopath or a sociopath and then take adequate action to guard themselves, to protect themselves?
In fact, Zaka, there was a study which said that 40 to 50% of the women found it okay to be beaten by their husbands. So, if with this mindset, if women are living, they would not step out or they would not walk out. In fact, they would accept the beating. So, that is the big issue. Why women don't step out of the house if the person is abusive? Why they don't talk to local people, or why they don't lodge a case with the police? So many times women have lodged cases, but they have taken back. So that is of course the mindset, but also what is worrying is this depravity, this mindset of men that you are becoming so brutal. So I think there is a psychological issue also in this, and the mental health is a very important factor which needs to be looked into.
So,
but above
Dr.
that,
Jayanti Datta,
I believe the neighborhood system. We have to know what is happening in our neighborhood.
Dr. Jayanti Datta, the depravity, and I want to come back to that. Is that because people are, seeing depraved crimes, whether it is fiction or in real life, either through TV series or through books and so on, or is it that we are all living such secluded lives that that sense of community is not there anymore? The fact that someone can cut up the body of somebody that was living with him for 3 or 5 or 10 years, cook it, feed it to dogs, and then claim to the police that, oh, by the way, she committed suicide, I did not kill her. I mean, that's inhuman. I don't think a human rational mind can come up with something like that.
Zaka, I think you started with the psychopathic tendency of this perpetrator. First and foremost thing you must realize that the apathy, whether it is the uniformed people who are responsible for seeing that law is meted out, justice is meted out, and the people are safe. It's total apathy. Things which happened in Delhi, whether it is Shraddha, it's Sakshi, it's Nikki, all these things, Sakshi especially, people were onlookers. He smashed her face also. Still people were apprehensive. They did not intervene. Now everybody knows that you can get away with anything and everything. The basic apathy which you have in the community, in the society, I don't believe that rearing up your sons with a particular input is going to solve this kind of brutal killings. No. What can really make the difference is you apprehend the criminals and you set an example of exemplary punishment quickly. We had the fast court and all those rules, all these legal formalities, but still you took 8 years for Nirvaya's case. And you see Shraddha's case, what happened? You had the forensic support. I think it's sheer wastage of time from the side of the court and the jurisdiction, the judiciary. It's high time you took note of the modus operandi of these people. The fact remains, in all these cases, the perpetrator felt these are alone. These people have nowhere to go. In case of Shraddha, I would have blamed the police officers where Shraddha went in Mumbai, registered the case, and she was forced to withdraw the complaint. Now, when you have a complaint and the person is forced to withdraw, the minute the person is withdrawing the complaint, police says, all right, it's done, it's not in our jurisdiction. Sorry, you should have been vigilant in this kind of cases. If we were vigilant, we could have saved this girl.
So let me ask Mr. Kakkar, as former police commissioner of Delhi, both Abba Singh and Dr. Datta suggesting that A, there is no fear of the rule of law, and B, it's very, very difficult for women who are victims of physical abuse, emotional abuse to first of all, get their complaints registered, get them into an FIR, and from there to actually securing conviction is a long and arduous journey that most people don't want to come forth and lodge these complaints. And the perpetrators often know that, the system is stacked up against the victim. Therefore, they are happy to get away with it. Mr. Kakkar.
I have been listening to the three honorable ladies. I don't think I need to anything to dispute with them, but point is, we must realize that the people who are in live-in relationship, by and large, considering the social norms, are not normal. Now, first of all, let's accept this. If they were normal, they would.
What does
Like
that
the
mean?
society
What do you
tells us,
mean that
get
they are
married.
not normal, Mr. Kakkar?
Normal in the sense, I'm not saying normal in the sense of the LGBT and all that. No, I'm saying that mentally they must accept that there are some social norms. That is, having said that, there is a lot of impatience, intolerance, and ultimately,
It is the duty of the police to prevent crime.
please keep
Yeah,
quiet?
one second. One
Will
second.
you please-
Let Mr. Kakkar finish.
Will you-
Yeah, I don't
will you
necessarily
please-
agree with what he's saying,
Will
but
you
let him
please
finish.
let me say?
Yeah.
Will you please let me say?
Yes.
And ultimately, it is the suspicion that develops because of certain behavior of from the either side, which culminates, you see, thinking of taking a revenge, which leads to this sort of brutal murders. I fully agree that the system, our judicial system and the investigation system is not as fast as it should be to deal with cases of this nature. I can only suggest that let's categorize the in our books, let's categorize. Time has come to categorize the type of murders, and anything of this nature, where there's so much of exhibitionism, where there's so much of brutality, revenge, we must have very fast trials, very fast charge sheet, because in all these things you find that the evidence is there. Sufficient evidence is there to connect
Mr.
the accused
Kakkar,
with the crime.
With due respect, I have two fundamental differences with what you said. One, I don't think it's abnormal that people are in live-in relationships these days. I don't think it's any more different than two people who are married. I don't think there is any evidence to show that the level of... Can I finish, please? 30 seconds. Give me 30 seconds. I don't think there's any empirical evidence to suggest that the level of violence against women is more in live-in relationships than it is in marriages, right? And the most thing that I fundamentally disagree with you is that this notion that if one of the partners cheats, then it's okay to physically abuse that person, even kill that person. I don't think that cuts at all. I think that is absolutely specious logic.
I have not said any of these things that you are attributing to me.
Okay, so then
I am only saying the people who have this live-in relationship, their families must accept. In India today, I wonder if any family would accept her daughter to be living in this sort of relationship. Now, some sort of acceptability has to come in, because when she is ill-treated, maltreated, abused, the only place she can really go back is to the family. But today, that family is not prepared to accept, and therefore she has to, perforce, continue to live in that under that stress, danger.
Let me ask Karunanandi if that is accurate. Look, like I said, I fundamentally disagree with what Mr. Kakkar said, but do you think he has a point when it comes to traditional Indian families, where even today marriage is the accepted norm, live-in is not, and therefore if there are women who are in a live-in relationship which is abusive in nature, they have nowhere to turn to because their families almost inevitably disown them?
Thank you so much, Zaka Jacob. Mr. Kakkar, I'm extremely grateful that you were able to speak your mind so clearly, because the views you have are in fact reflected by some members, and including some senior members, you yourself were the Commissioner of Police, of the police forces. Your views are against the criminal law. your views are against constitutional law, and your views are against the very dignity and freedom of the citizens of this country. Your views, sir, have resulted in a low registration of FIRs where there is a case of impugned honor. Ideas such as yours have in fact led to an amendment in the criminal law in 2013, where if an FIR is not registered, then officials with mindset like yours who fail to register the FIRs may themselves have FIRs registered against them. So let us be on the same page on that. Let us be very clear about that. Secondly, yes, in all of that, he does have one point. That is a good point. And that good point is that because of the views that people like Mr. Kakkad and others hold, daughters, sisters, women, citizens of this country who have these live-in relationships or who have other relationships are sometimes isolated, very frequently isolated, and don't have other places to turn. The kind of Stockholm syndrome which makes such women not able to leave these relationships, and because there is extensive and massive state failure in allowing, or rather setting up, support systems such as shelters, hotlines that work, psychologists. There are very few psychologists in this country, and absolutely not enough to be able to staff hotlines. But even a system of training of trainers and to have people, and down the line, to have people accessible to help, do not exist. The shelters are such that you would not want anybody who you were even vaguely fond of, however poor, however maltreated, to go to. So where will these women go? When we speak about Sakshi, young 16-year-old Sakshi, who was killed in the brutal way she was, there is a continuum between her and Sakshi Malik. Sakshi Malik is an Olympic medalist. And the way that she was treated and the way in which her abuser has not been arrested, the way in which she was dragged through the mud by the same police that failed to register her FIR, is a mark of the impunity with which crimes against women are dealt with. Today, there is an emergency. There is a war against women. And today, the need is to do what is not rocket science. We can't keep just having these panels. At some point, our governments, our state governments, our central government, the Home Minister must act.
No, Karna, with due respect, I've given you ample time. I fundamentally disagree with the last point that you made. No, once again, not because of anything else, not because I don't think that the wrestlers have a point or that their protest needs to be heard or that they need to be given a platform where their voices are heard. Yes, they are also victims of sexual abuse, but I don't think you can compare somebody who was brutally murdered with a stone hit on her head multiple times. I believe 32 times is what the police report says. You cannot compare such a person to somebody who was as badly as she was, as brutally as she was, picked off from Jantar Mantar because she violated Section 144 orders. I don't think both are comparable. But I fundamentally disagree with that. But other than that, everything else that you said, Karna, I agree with. But I want to come back. I want to come back to Mr. Kakkad. No. Once again, Mr. Kakkad, I'm coming back to that fundamental point that you made, that you believe this is happening because A, it's live-in relationships, and you believe that it's because these people can't turn back to their families. Is that necessarily the fault of these women, or is that the fault of those families? I mean, how can you, after having, given birth to and grown up a child for 15, 20, 25 years, suddenly just disown that person just because she happens to live in with someone you don't approve of, or she happens to share a space with someone that you don't approve of? I mean, it doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, so are you telling me that your 20 years of love and care and support and affection means nothing?
Today it may not make a sense to you and to me and to everybody else. But let's let's be very practical. We are all here, and if my daughter, my sister, or somebody else is sitting here, has this sort of live-in relationship, are we going to readily accept it? One is the pressurized, and either the moral pressure or something, but are we readily going to accept it? First of all, you must have an answer to this question. My answer is no. Today, no, maybe 5 years hence, 10 years hence, this becomes a regular practice and everything, and the families start accepting. Therefore, when these girls are abused by the partner again and again, they may, of course, like to go away, live separately, but then you say to remand homes or the homes here. These girls who are in live-in relationship are fairly educated. They know the consequences, and these are not the type who are going to go to the shelter homes or other places, even if they decide to do that.
Mr. Kakkar,
so therefore,
I'm sorry again, with due respect to your age and experience, point is not that. I think you're missing the point. The point is that no one should have to brook under any circumstances physical or verbal abuse. Whether you're poor or rich or middle class makes absolutely no difference. You cannot condone physical or mental abuse in any form.
No.
Yes.
Abba Singh, I think that's the bottom line.
I am not doing that.
I am not
No,
doing
by
that.
saying, Mr. Kakkar, no, one second. One second. Let's have an organized way in which we go about this. So Abba Singh first, and then I'll go to Jayanti Datta. Yeah.
will be murdered or she should face such torture. No, he should know that the DV Act legitimizes live-in relationship. So in today's time, it's not something very, I would say that out of the box that a woman is living with a man, but that does not mean that she should be cut into pieces. That does not mean that she should be killed like Shraddha Walkar. That is the duty of the police. That is law and order of the country.
Legally, it is acceptable, but socially, is it acceptable? Socially, is it acceptable?
No, Mr. Kakkar, what is socially got to do with an act of crime?
Socially, is it acceptable?
Socially or not socially has nothing to do with an act of crime. Anyway, yeah, Abba Singh finish, and after that, Dr. Jayanti Datta.
No,
Yeah.
the crime takes place later. The crime takes place later. The crime takes place.
One second. Abba Singh, whether the crime happens on day one or happens in the 10th year is immaterial. A crime is a crime. And whether that was a fully registered marriage or whether that was a live-in, again, is immaterial. An abusive relationship is an abusive relationship, period. Abba Singh.
Let me tell you, the courts legitimize live-in relationship. The DV Act says if a woman is in a live-in relationship which is in the form of marriage, she can be given alimony, she can demand maintenance, she can demand a roof over her head. So let us not condemn a live-in relationship.
Okay, no, but Dr. Jayanti Datta, in as much as, one of the points that Mr. Kakkar makes, and I think he has a point there, that in conservative Indian society, even to this day, many families do not accept live-in relationships. They almost, give up on their daughters who they know are in live-in relationships. The point is, as a result of that, Dr. Datta, what happens is, if they happen to be in an abusive relationship, then these women have nowhere to go. At least, certainly, they can't turn to their families. And that is a problem.
I agree. I totally agree with Mr. Kakkar, and I disagree with you, Jaka, on one of your points. When you said live-in relationship probably don't have that much of abusive relationship, there is not so much of violence. You said that the violence existing in the live-in relationship and a marital relationship is almost same. It's not true. Live-in relationship are subjected to more violence, and I totally agree with Mr. Kakkar when he says that if you look at these cases, you examine them minutely, you will find they cannot go back. They cannot go back. They don't have any support system. Shraddha was earning enough. Her money was utilized by this perpetrator. But where
No,
did she
but
go?
ma'am, no, one sec. I want to press this point. I want to know from you. One second. Only Dr. Datta on the screen. Dr. Datta, I want to know from you. Do you have empirical evidence to show that the level of violence is far higher in a live-in relationship or in live-in relationships as compared to
Yes.
registered marriages?
I have a postgraduate.
Does she have any?
No, data. I'm talking data, please.
Dissertation from Delhi University.
Data, please.
Yes, I'm talking about data.
Yeah.
I'm not saying on air because, see, I do marital counseling and every now and then they come back and they say, where to go? Shraddha tried getting out of it. She could not because there was no acceptance. The parents tried marrying her off. The boy refused. So in case of this Sakshi, in case of Nikki also had to die. She was also killed and put in the refrigerator. Why? Because she had nobody to turn back to. If you are in a live-in relationship, legal sanction might be there. Social sanctions are still not there.
Okay.
Your children will not be accepted. You are denied any kind of facility. People talk behind you. You are belittled that you are in a
Okay,
relationship.
none of that is a license to crime, but nonetheless, Karuna, I'll give you the final word. Please respond. Dr. Datta and Mr. Kakkar saying there may be legal acceptance to live-in relationships, but she has empirical evidence to suggest that the level of violence in live-in relationships is far higher than regular marriages.
Thank you, Zaka Jacob. I would appreciate being called Karuna Nandi or Ms. Nandi, whatever you prefer. I have evidence. The National Family Health Survey data shows that the level of rapes are the highest in marriage. The rapes that are in live-in relationships are actually those that can be prosecuted under Section 375 and 376. However, the rapes in marriage can't even be prosecuted and are underreported, and yet the National Family Health Survey data shows that over 85% of rapes that are reported to the healthcare system are in marriage by husbands. You say you have empirical evidence, ma'am. You have not cited any. When Dr. Jayanti Datta and when Mr. Kakkar say that, oh, this is what all of society believes, they are wrong. Society is not a whole. Society is made up of many, many different kinds of people. And when you put something in a particular way, you reinforce bigotry and become effectively, and with respect, I say this with the greatest respect.
Ma'am, you are wrong.
So,
Apologists for the most brutal crimes
You are
in the
saying
country.
that rape is more in
What do you
marital
suggest?
Okay.
relationship. Reporting is more.
All right, no,
It's online.
I don't know unless I
Family
see the
Health Survey
data, and I haven't seen data presented in this program or otherwise that the level of violence of women who are in live-in relationships is far higher than those in marriages. I'm not prepared to believe that. But anyway, we'll leave it at that. I don't think that is the issue here. The fundamental issue is that none of this is a license to crime, whether it's a live-in relationship or whether it is a marriage. Ultimately, if you're living with a sociopath, you need to have support systems, you need to have family, friends, or even just a helpline to be able to turn to and say that I'm stuck in this kind of a physical and emotional abusive relationship and therefore I need to get out. That is something that society, the state, we have to enable that. And should that enabling happen, then maybe we will see less of Shraddhas and less of Saraswatis and less of Sakshis. But let's move on to another story that's been sort of rankling for a while now. There has been another provocation by Khalistani elements in Canada. Just days before the anniversary of Operation Blue Star, which was earlier this week, a parade was taken out by Khalistani sympathizers in the city of Brampton in Ontario in Canada. A tableau depicting Indira Gandhi's assassination was part of this parade. The video went viral on social media. It evoked a sharp reaction from the Congress, which called for universal condemnation. External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar slammed the Canadian government for giving space to these extremists, something that India has been raising with Canada for a while. And earlier in the day, the Canadian High Commissioner to India tweeted that he was appalled by the incident and condemned the act. However, the question remains, is that enough? Is a mere tweet and a condemnation enough? Time and again, we have seen Hindu temples, the Indian consulate there being vandalized, and statues, including the statue of Mahatma Gandhi, being defaced by pro-Khalistan elements in Canada. Why does the Justin Trudeau government embolden such acts without strictest of punishment and the swiftest of punishment? Can the Indian government mount the necessary pressure that will force the Canadian government to act?
this float issue used. Let me actually answer it, because I think there's a bigger issue involved. And the bigger issue involved is really the space that Canada has continuously and frankly to us, we are at a loss to understand, other than the requirements of vote bank politics, why anybody would do this.
ऐसी चीज जो हत्या है वो अपराधी घटना होती है, और अपराधी घटना को और उस अपराध की घटना को सेलिब्रेट नहीं किया जाना चाहिए, और उसी समाज और सरकार को ऐसी चीजों पे कार्रवाई करनी चाहिए, क्योंकि वो उनके नियम और उनके कानून में भी जो है भली चीज नहीं मानी जाती।
And we're getting breaking news. The Congress party is now hit out of the centre. K.C. Venugopal has tweeted, and I quote, Indira Gandhi was one of the tallest leaders of Indian history who laid down her life to protect India's sovereignty. The disgusting events in Brampton, Canada compelled Prime Minister Modi to rise above partisan interests and speak against such events being allowed. Why has Dr. S. Jaishankar not summoned the Canadian High Commissioner yet? Pallavi has more details on this. So the Congress really rallying around this story?
Yes, and they've upped the ante, because in the afternoon we saw tweets from Milind Devra, Jairam Ramesh, Zaka, where essentially they wanted the central government to step in. And we saw the Foreign Affairs Minister actually stepping in and also condemning it. But what now they want to do is also make it a little bit more political. K.C. Venugopal's comment is interesting, because now he wants the Prime Minister to step in, and he wants a statement from the Prime Minister. So clearly the words of the Foreign Minister earlier today at the press conference is no longer enough. The Congress certainly want to whip up this entire issue, especially because it concerns the former Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, and also then take pot shots at the central government, particularly over its foreign policy.
All right, Pallavi, we'll leave it at that. Let me now open this up to our guests. R.P. Singh, spokesperson of the BJP, Rohan Gupta, national spokesperson of the Congress, Rajiv Dogra, former diplomat, and Terry Miliuski is the author of Blood for Blood, 50 Years of the Global Khalistan Project. R.P. Singh, the Congress is saying that, Indira Gandhi was a Prime Minister of the nation. She laid down her life for India's sovereignty. Why isn't stricter action being taken? At the very least, the Canadian High Commissioner should be summoned and the government of India's displeasure be known.
Well, Jaishankar ji, through his statement, has already shown his displeasure and has mentioned in detail how we are taking this complete tableau, or whatever it's float called, not in good terms, and then it's not appreciated at all. And even I am saying on record that, and my tweet was at around 9:30 in the morning after watching this on your channel itself, that this is not acceptable. And she was a Prime Minister of the country. Whatever differences we might have with her and as a party man or even as Sikh, but we will not allow any sort of violence being projected and Mrs. Gandhi being shown in this way on a float abroad. And also that no Sikhism. I mean, let me put this also on record, because I'm the Sikh panelist on your panel now. That no way Sikhism teaches you violence. Sikh gurus never taught us any violence. The first guru to 10th guru never taught us to do anything of this sort. I mean, and it's not in Guru, even in Guru Granth Sahib. We only speak of humanism. And this is shocking. This is appalling. I mean, this has to be condemned in whatever term it has to be. I mean, this is not acceptable. And then this handful of fringe who thinks that they can overshadow the Sikhs overall in diaspora and even here in India, they're mistaken. They think by doing so they can probably gain some.
The External Affairs Minister has spoken about it in no uncertain terms. He has said this is absolutely condemnable. He's also said that this is not an incident in isolation. There have been previous instances as well. And he says it baffles us. The only reason somebody should allow this to happen is for vote bank politics. What more are you expecting him to do?
If you see that Mr. Jaishankar has issued the statement, I think this act is not a normal act. The former Prime Minister of the country, who has given her life against terrorism for the country, and the way this incident has happened after 4 days, thus giving a statement is not enough. He should have summoned the Canadian High Commissioner long back. It's after demand of Congress party, I think the statement has come. It's not about one Prime Minister, it's about the country. The way Canada has allowed Khalistan movement movement, it has given the space for last many years. We see that the attacks on temples or protest against Indian High Commission. I think this issue needs to be taken very seriously by government of India. And the way this has crossed now, this has crossed the limit. Like the way they have shown Indira Gandhi in their float is not acceptable at all. So just writing a statement or just putting a statement is not enough. It should have been taken very, very seriously. This is against the question. This is the question of pride of the country.
So,
This is
Rajiv
not for any
Dogra, you know, there is a
political
pattern here. Attacks on the High Commissioner or consulates, attacks on Mahatma Gandhi's statue. There was even, I'm given to understand, the so-called Khalistan referendum in Canada. So, clearly, if the Canadians are not taking India's sovereignty and how important that is to us seriously, then India should reciprocate in the same coin.
Well, exactly. But before I answer your question, I'll go up regarding your leading statement that there seems to be a pattern. Indeed, there is a pattern. And I know it for a fact that ISI is guiding that pattern. Second, why is Canada the epicenter of all these misactions or atrocious actions? The referendum was planned at least 6 to 7 years in advance. It was supposed to be held in 2020, and it was started in Canada in 2022 only because of COVID. Otherwise, it would have happened a couple of years earlier, and the crescendo of the movement may have reached by now. So we are fortunate that way that nature intervened against them, because what they are doing is scornful. The second thing is that why is the government of Canada not condemning this or controlling this, when we see that Australian government, the British government had condemned the incidents which took place in their respective countries, and to some extent it has been controlled. Canada, it seems, is, especially Prime Minister Trudeau's party, it seems is swayed by the fact that there are 24 MPs who claim to have some kind of a connection with these Khalistani people. So what should India do, A, against the people who are the perpetrators of this horrible incident, and B, against the Canadian government itself, so that it takes some kind of action against these people who are disturbing the peace of their own country, who are indulging in acts which are just short of terrorism.
You know, that is exactly what India's problem is, Terry Miliuski, that, you know, Australia also saw similar scenes. There were attacks on public places, there were Khalistani slogans, temples were attacked, but the Australian government has taken visible action against these elements. People have been arrested, cases are going on, whereas in Canada it seems like there seems to be, I'm sorry I'm using these strong words, but it's almost like a free run for these elements. Tomorrow, if India were to host, let's say, a referendum on Quebec, will that go down well in Canada?
That's a painful point you've made for a Canadian, and it's a good one. The short answer to the question, you know, how can this happen? Why does Canada allow it? Indian politicians have known for many years why Canada allows it. It's a simple matter that Canada has freedom of speech. This is the standard official answer from Canadian governments. Look, we don't like this, but we support the territorial integrity of India and the unity of India, but we have freedom of speech and we're not going to abolish that. Well, here's the problem. The reason why the Khalistanis get away with this, and this has been going on for decades now, this sort of glorification of terrorist violence. There's worse incidents than this in the past. Just mention the glorification of the Air India bomber, Talvinder Parmar, whose poster is life-size on the outside of an important Gurdwara in Surrey, British Columbia, the worst mass murderer in Canadian history, the author of the Flight 182 bombing in 1985, which killed a total of 331 completely innocent civilians. So it's been going on for decades. And the reason that it's been going on is because, yes, the Khalistanis have freedom of speech and we're not going to abolish that. But so do Canadian politicians, and they don't use it. They have freedom of speech to denounce this firmly, publicly, immediately, but they don't use that because they're afraid. Because they are, forgive me, I'm a Canadian, they're cowards. They're afraid that they will lose votes. because this isn't just the Trudeau government. They happen to be in power now thanks to the support of the leftist New Democratic Party headed by Jagmeet Singh, who's a known sympathizer of the Khalistan movement, who, when I asked him in an interview to condemn the posters of Parmar, the Air India bomber, refused on 5 occasions to condemn and denounce.
No, but Mr.
those
Miliuski,
posters.
you know, I don't buy this whole freedom of expression argument. What is the freedom of expression in showing, you know, a blood-stained puppet figure of the former Indian Prime Minister, puppet figures
no
of 2 of
violence
her
involved.
bodyguards shooting her? What is freedom of expression here? I mean, there's no freedom of expression
Well,
here.
there is a difference between violence and freedom of speech. We don't lock people up in Canada for speech which we deplore, and that isn't going to change in any of the Western democracies. That you can ask this of the Australians or the Germans or the British. No, they do not criminalize speech, and that's not going to happen.
I'm sorry. What this is, and let's be very clear about it. I don't think this is freedom of speech. This is eulogizing an assassination of a sitting, at that time, a sitting head of government.
And we both...
You are valorizing an
believe.
assassination of a former prime minister. I'm sorry, there's no freedom of expression here.
But don't mistake me.
No, will
I'm not
show
saying
the
that this is
Kanishka
fine.
bombing
I'm-
again,
I-
like, in
no-
a similar way?
Nobody
Will
is
they- can they run a
nobody
floor
is
of
saying
Kanishka
it.
bombing?
I have not come to say that it's fine because of freedom of speech. I'm saying that Indian politicians need to understand that they need to be more serious about persuading Canada to denounce and condemn this by using force, by using the diplomatic force of saying, if India is a rising power, you want free trade with India, you want access to the Indian market, forget it. We will not deal with any politician who will not publicly and explicitly and clearly condemn this kind of glorification
I'm
of
sorry.
violence.
I don't think this public condemnation is good enough. What needs to be done is the organizers of this tableau need to be arrested, because you are effectively like I said, eulogizing an assassination of a former Prime Minister of India. I mean, that's unacceptable. I firmly believe that has nothing to do with freedom of expression. I'm sorry. This is not freedom of expression. RP Singh.
It is disgraceful.
RP
It is
Singh.
disgraceful.
No, it's disgraceful, it's condemnable, and it's criminal. I'm very clear about it.
Not
RP Singh.
Well, you're wrong. Under Canadian law, that's not the case.
Mr. Terry, can you run a similar tableau of the Kanishka aeroplane being bombed like this and people's body parts strewn outside the plane, and similar thing can be run on the streets of Brampton or any other part of the Canada? You can't dare.
If Canadian politicians will tolerate this disgraceful display, yes, they will probably tolerate that. They do tolerate the display of martyr posters with ceremonial sword and glamorous pictures of Talvinder Parmar. They'll tolerate anything. They should not. It's an absolute disgrace to Canada, but they do tolerate it. And they have legal grounds to say that it's freedom of speech under Canadian law, maybe not under Indian law. Fine. But my point is this, that Indian politicians...
Mr. Miliuski, one second. Tomorrow. One second. Let me ask a question. Tomorrow, if there was a giant poster of Osama bin Laden, right, outside the White House or outside the US Congress or the Canadian government building, and people there were coming and eulogizing him, is that acceptable? Is that freedom of expression?
It is freedom of expression, but it's not acceptable to me.
That's not acceptable. That's not acceptable. But the depiction of the assassination of a former Indian Prime Minister is freedom of expression. Wow.
I'm not saying I did not say it's acceptable.
I'm sorry, that's convenient to put it mildly, and that's double standards to call it out.
I'm not. No. Wrong. I'm saying both are unacceptable. You mistake me. Again, I'm saying both are unacceptable. Both are disgraceful.
Well, this is rank hypocrisy of the Canadian system.
I challenge you tonight. And when I say you, it's not just you, Mr. Miliuski. I challenge anybody watching this that tomorrow, if a giant poster of Osama bin Laden came up anywhere in any Western capital, and people were standing there and singing praises of this terrorist, they will be rounded up and put in jail is what they will be done with.
Well,
they will not,
Canada,
they will
you're
not be
wrong,
brooked under, oh, this is freedom of expression. I'm sorry.
I'm afraid that the law says you're wrong, and that's a problem. So how do we solve it is the issue.
No.
We both agree
Rohan,
that this is a
Rohan, no,
disgraceful
I'm very
display,
clear about it.
and that
You know,
action-
the Western
and that something should be
societies,
done
Western
about that.
democracies, it can't be, oh, the terrorists that we think are terrorists, but your terrorists are not terrorists. I'm sorry. I don't think, that's not acceptable. Rohan.
Nobody's saying that. Nobody's saying that. That's a straw man. That's a straw man. You're mistaking my point.
One second, Rohan Gupta, yeah.
This cannot be freedom of speech. What is he talking? We are talking about former Prime Minister of the country, and he is saying that under the law of Canadian government, this is not, this is freedom of speech. How can you say that? How can you have double standards when you ask question about the terrorist?
I'm correctly characterizing Canadian law, sir. I'm correctly characterizing the state of the law. And the problem is that it's not enough for Canadian it's not enough for Indian politicians to bang the table and say, lock him up. What do we charge them with? What do we charge them with?
Insulting India. It's not about India putting pressure. You need to understand that you are insulting the former Prime Minister of a particular country who has good ties with Canada. You cannot justify I'm sorry to say there is no discussion on this. I'm really sorry to say there cannot be any discussion on this.
You have
is against Canadian Prime Minister.
You forget that you've forgotten, sir, that I'm on your side of the issue. I'm on your side of the issue, saying this is unacceptable.
I got to leave it at that.
And
you know,
what you
I'm
need
very
to do
clear.
about it-
I'm very clear tonight, ladies and gentlemen. If Osama bin Laden is a terrorist, so are the assassins of Indira Gandhi. Absolutely crystal clear about it. No ifs and buts. It can't be that one set of terrorists are okay, the other set of terrorists are not. I don't think that's acceptable. If Western societies don't come around to understanding this, that it is not okay, it is criminal to be showing the assassination of a former prime minister, blood and all, in a public tableau or a float, I don't know what can get them to see reason. We'll leave it at that. Thank you very much for joining us. I'll catch you again tomorrow night, same time. Good night.
And they will again shower them with gifts and love them, and they take them back. Women take them. That is called battered wife syndrome. And many of our girls, even in Shraddha's case, we have seen that she was going through tough time with that boy, but still she was living with that person. It was because of that. They don't know that they have to go to a counselor, somebody and ask help. They don't know how to walk out of that relationship when they are beaten up, or they are harassed mentally or physically.
One other thing that we've noticed, ma'am, is that oftentimes these kinds of victims of such harsh abuse, they are secluded away from their family, from their friends. They have no support system of any kind. What are the signs that one needs to pick up if somebody happens to be living in an abusive relationship, there is physical violence and so on? What should one look out for?
In every relationship, it is very, very important that a person has support system, whether from family or friends, and share their problems to the persons they are close to. But in Indian society, especially women don't, share their problems outside a relationship. They think that they have to protect that relationship from outside world, and even if that is abusive relationship, they don't share. So first thing is, if you are feeling that somebody is abusing you, even verbally, you should walk out of this and share it with your friends. It is very important because they will give you a suggestion, and family also need to support their children.
All right.
If they are supporting, these kinds of things will not happen. Earlier also I said, and many people disagreed with me, which is okay. But families need to support their children, even if they are having a live-in relationship. In
All right.
that way, I think they will be able to share if they are going through any problem.
Okay, Rekha Sharma, we'll leave it at that. We'll see how this story plays out. This is, of course, the latest in a series of very, very violent crimes, almost inhuman crimes, where not only is the victim, the woman in these cases, murdered, but also the body is disposed of in the most brutal of fashions.
The murder of Shraddha Walker sent shockwaves across the nation. Her partner Aftab murdered and then dismembered her body, dumping her parts in a nearby forest. Now, a similar horror has emerged from the Maximum City, where a 56-year-old man has been arrested for allegedly murdering his live-in partner and chopping her body into pieces.
There was a tree cutter, there was a saw cutter that was present inside the hall as well as the bedroom. There was a polythene, there was a black plastic which was put on the bed. Her hair were cut and kept there. There were parts of her leg which were being found by the cops.
इन्वेस्टिगेशन में ऐसा रिवील हो चुका था कि एक कपल था, लिव इन रिलेशन में रह रहा था उधर. उनका आइडेंटिफिकेशन हो चुका है. अक्यूज्ड को भी अरेस्ट किया गया. जो डेड बॉडी के पीसेस मिले वो एनालिसिस के लिए हमने जेजो हॉस्पिटल में भेज दिया है.
The accused, identified as Manoj Sahani, was staying with 32-year-old Saraswati Vaidya. Decomposing body parts were found in the home, and the police say the murder could have occurred 2 to 3 days back. Police have recovered 13 body parts and are trying to find where the rest were dumped. As per the FIR, the police have recovered a tree cutter that was smeared with blood and say that human flesh was kept in a bucket near the kitchen. Sources say the accused used to boil the body parts in a cooker in an attempt to hide the smell. But the neighbors raised the alarm.
मैंने फर्स्ट टाइम इंटीमेट किया था, मतलब मेरे को स्मेल आई थी तो मुझे ऐसा लगा था कि हाँ कुछ इश्यूज है इधर, लेकिन मुझे लगा नॉर्मली कोई माउस हो चूहा मर गया रहेगा तो उसकी स्मेल आ रही, स्टिंग आ रही है. लेकिन 2 दिन कंटिन्यू आ रही थी. वो कैसे आ रही थी? आफ्टरनून और नाइट में आती थी, मॉर्निंग और इवनिंग में नहीं आती थी.
Forensic teams are trying to unearth more evidence, but the accused has floated a theory that Saraswati committed suicide and he did not want to be blamed for her death. The police is not buying it.
एक बंदा है मनोज साहनी करके और उसकी वाइफ थी वह सरस्वती वैद्य करके. सरस्वती वैद्य की उसने हत्या की है और उसने उसका डिस्पोज ऑफ करने के लिए उसका पीसेस करने का ट्राई किया है, ऐसा प्राइमरी इन्वेस्टिगेशन में निष्पन्न हुआ है.
From Shraddha Walker to Saraswati Vaidya, both women targeted by their partners, then murdered in the most barbaric fashion and butchered to hide the evidence. The big question remains, what explains this mindset? Bureau Report, CNN News 18.
Before we open this up to our guests who will be joining us in a moment, I want to first go across to the chairperson of the National Commission for Women, Rekha Sharma. Thank you very much, ma'am, for speaking with us here on CNN News 18. We are seeing this again and again, whether it was Aftab and Shraddha here in Delhi, whether it is this Manoj Sahani and Saraswati Vaidya in Mumbai. We are seeing the kind of depravity in behavior, almost like these are not human beings. This is almost like animal-like behavior. Why are we seeing this extreme depravity in crimes against women of late?
Namaskar and a very warm welcome. You're watching Vantage. I'm Akanksha Swaroop. Canada's inaction against Khalistanis is hurting its relationship with India again. Today, a parade where the assassination of Indira Gandhi was celebrated is being widely condemned in India. India's External Affairs Minister says these provocations are a result of vote bank politics. The onus now falls on the Trudeau administration. Are they ready to take action against separatists, or will they still ignore this? In Europe, the chorus for Ukraine's NATO membership is growing. And not just that, Eastern European nations might be ready to put boots on the ground if needed. That's the message from a former chief of NATO. In Pakistan, there's a new player entering the political fray. The Istikam-e-Pakistan party. It is made up of former members of Imran Khan's party. Will this new party sideline the former Prime Minister? And New York has become one of the most polluted cities in the world. We'll tell you why. I'm Akanksha Swaroop filling in for Palki Sharma. The headlines first. Kremlin fumes after a blast on a key ammonia pipeline, warns of negative effect on the Ukraine grain deal. Moscow blames Ukrainian sabotage group for the attack. For Russia to continue with the grain deal, it wants its ammonia exports through the pipeline to resume. Fierce fighting is on at a military site in Sudan. The army and paramilitary forces battle to gain control of a military facility in Khartoum. This comes after the paramilitary claimed control of the Yarmouk weapons manufacturing complex. The deadly conflict in Sudan has been going on since mid-April. China dismisses US accusation that it has failed to stop production of fentanyl. Beijing calls it fake news. China banned the export of the deadly drug to the US in 2019. But US ambassador to China says Chinese firms continue to sell fentanyl in the black market. Has the Taliban banned international NGOs from offering education to out-of-school Afghan children? UNICEF suspects says it will affect 500,000 boys and girls. Since seizing power almost 2 years ago, Taliban have banned girls from secondary schools and universities. And this is no laughing matter. Singapore says sorry to Malaysia. The apology comes after a Singapore-born comedian joked about the disappearance of MH370. This led to a massive outcry in Malaysia. The MH370 disappeared in 2014 with 239 people on board. Our first story tonight is about the India-Canada relationship. One that has seen several ups and downs in recent years. But what's happening now may cause lasting damage. A major controversy has erupted. There was a parade in Ontario. It featured a float. It apparently celebrated the assassination of a former Indian Prime Minister. New Delhi has reacted sharply. What about Canada? There was a statement of condemnation. But it might not be enough considering the indifference of the Trudeau administration towards Indian sensitivities. There are little signs of any change there. Instead, Ottawa seems to be hardening its position. Recently, Canada's National Security Advisor levied a serious charge. She says India is a source of foreign interference in Canada. Seems like both sides are on a collision course. Let's get you the latest. The current source of tensions are these pictures. They are from Brampton in Ontario. This is a Canadian city. A sizable Indian population lives there. But it seems separatists are getting a free run. What happened? This week, there was a parade in Brampton. It featured this tableau. There's a statue of India's former Prime Minister, Indira Gandhi. In a blood-stained white sari, in front of the statue, there are turban-clad men. They are pointing their guns at Gandhi's statue. There's a poster too. It says, revenge. I'm sure some of you have figured this out by now. This tableau is a recreation of Gandhi's assassination. Indira Gandhi was India's Prime Minister, first from 1966 to 1977, then again from 1980 till her death in 1984. She was assassinated by her Sikh bodyguards. The 1980s was a tense period. It witnessed the height of the Khalistan movement, a separatist movement to demand a separate homeland for the Sikhs. There were violent clashes. The Golden Temple in the Indian state of Punjab was stormed. This is one of the most significant shrines for Sikhs. Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale, the leader of the Khalistan movement, took refuge in the complex with his supporters. Security forces stormed the temple to clear them out. Yes, I'm talking about Operation Blue Star. Indira Gandhi had authorized it. 2 years later, she was assassinated for giving those orders. Her bodyguards, the assailants, said they took revenge for Operation Blue Star. And that's the scene depicted here. Reports say pro-Khalistanis were behind this float. It was part of a 5-kilometer long parade. There's no justification for it. It glorifies violence. India's External Affairs Minister issued a strong-worded statement today.
Frankly, to us, we are at a loss to understand, other than the requirements of vote bank politics, why anybody would do this. I think there is a larger underlying issue about the space which is given to separatists, to extremists, to people who advocate violence. And I think it's not good for the relationship, and I think it's not good for Canada.
Politicians across party lines have condemned this. They have called it appalling and despicable. Canada's top diplomat in New Delhi spoke out too. He said there is no place in Canada for hate. But like Minister Jaishankar said, this is not a one-off case. Such incidents keep happening, and their frequency has only increased under the Trudeau administration. Will things change after these events? A recent statement doesn't inspire confidence. It was made by Jodie Thomas. She is Canada's National Security Advisor. She has said India is among top sources of foreign interference in Canada. Listen to this. She says, when I talk about foreign interference and economic security, I'm now talking about a number of state actors and non-state proxies. This includes Russia, Iran, India. Thomas didn't say what bothers her, but it is unlikely that the issue of separatism and Khalistan doesn't figure in these conversations. There's another friction point: Indian students in Canada. Reports say Canada has some concerns about this. About what? Study permits and slow action by Canadian authorities to grant them. Ottawa believes this might open doors for interference. A controversy on the same issue is playing out right now. This is about 700 Indian students in Canada. Most of them are from the Indian state of Punjab. They are facing deportation. They had received offers of admission from Canadian institutions. It turns out these letters were fake. Minister Jaishankar was asked about this today. He said the Canadian system is fair and they have to find a solution to the problem. Remains to be seen where this will go, but the friction points in this relationship are clearly visible now. Speaking of tense relationships, let's now look at the NATO. Cracks seem to be appearing in NATO's united front. There seems to be two distinct factions emerging. On one side are the Eastern European nations. They're determined to see Ukraine join the alliance. The nations are informally known as the Bucharest Nine. Leaders of the Bucharest Nine met in Slovakia's capital, Bratislava, on Tuesday. They were joined by NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg. The Eastern European nations had one demand: Ukraine needs to become part of NATO as soon as possible.
It is also clear that Ukraine should really become member of NATO. The question is when, and the answer is shortly or immediately after the war. Because only the full membership, not a half membership, but only the full membership of NATO can guarantee the peace in Ukraine and guarantee the peace in Europe.
Ukraine cannot be left in the gray zone anymore. We cannot risk a war in Europe again. Of course, we expect Sweden to become NATO member before we all meet in Vilnius. I have a strong feeling that it is still possible to achieve. I also have a special plea to allies to complete the process of ratification. There is no reason to stall the process right now. Let us unite our efforts so that 32 countries can sit at the NATO table in Vilnius.
The promises we make should also be kept. We have to give perspective for Ukraine's membership application to the NATO. And in order to be able to move forward in that sense, we have to see the soonest end to the war conflict in Ukraine.
It seems the Bucharest Nine are upping the stakes. The former head of NATO and current advisor to Zelensky, Anders Rasmussen, has issued an ultimatum. He said Ukraine needs security guarantees and a membership path at the next NATO summit. The summit will begin on July 11th in Vilnius, the capital of Lithuania. Rasmussen said if these steps aren't taken, there will be an escalation. He said Poland and the Baltic nations might take matters into their own hands. How? By sending their own troops into Ukraine. Yes, NATO members are apparently threatening to send their soldiers into the war zone. It would mark a huge escalation and risk direct involvement of NATO troops in Ukraine. Remember, NATO follows the principle of collective defense. An attack on one member is an attack on all. So what happens if Russia kills NATO member country soldiers while attacking Ukraine? Rasmussen's threat is being seen as a pressure tactic, a way to arm twist the other faction in NATO, the cautious faction. This includes Germany and the US. They are reportedly still wary about letting Ukraine join the alliance too soon. It could serve to anger Russia further. Current NATO Secretary General Stoltenberg seems to be attempting a fine balancing act. He made these two statements in Bratislava.
All allies agree that NATO's door remains open, that Ukraine will become a member of NATO, and that this is a decision that only allies and Ukraine can make. Russia does not have a right to veto NATO enlargement. At the B9 meeting today, we prepared a NATO summit, which will take place in Vilnius in July. At that summit, I expect allies to agree a multi-year package of assistance so that Ukraine transitions from Soviet-era doctrines, training and equipment to NATO standards, and to help it move closer to the alliance.
On one hand, he said Russia does not have the right to veto a NATO enlargement. On the other, he spoke of a multi-year assistance package, something to help Ukraine move closer to the alliance. He did not commit to Ukraine immediately joining NATO. Then yesterday, he said NATO must give security assurances to Ukraine when the war ends. Assurances, not membership. He also reiterated that NATO will provide full-fledged security guarantees to full members only. It's this kind of cautious approach that's making the Eastern European nations angry. It threatens to divide NATO. The US seems to have noticed the tense situation.
The President will welcome Jens Stoltenberg, Secretary General of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, also known as NATO, to the White House on Monday, June 12th, to discuss the upcoming NATO summit that's going to be occurring in Lithuania. President Biden and Secretary General Stoltenberg will review preparations for the summit, including the work to further strengthen allied deterrence and defense, build on the 2014 Wales Summit Defense Investment Pledge, and deepen NATO's partnership. They will also discuss ally support for Ukraine in the face of Russia's brutal war of aggression.
So will Washington give in to Eastern Europe's pressure, or will it stick with a cautious approach? We'll bring you more on this story as it develops. America's influence is being tested on another front: currency. The de-dollarization campaign. It's a real thing now. Even American banks can't ignore it. JP Morgan, it is one of America's leading banks. The bank has recognized that the domination of the dollar is under threat. The bank has put out an assessment. Listen to this. Some signs of de-dollarization are emerging. This trend is likely to persist. That's what JP Morgan said. The bank believes there is no near-term threat to the greenback's domination. But there is a clear trend developing. Listen to this now. Again, this is from the same JP Morgan assessment. It says de-dollarization is evident in FX reserves, where USD share has declined to a record. FX is foreign exchange reserves, the money that central banks around the world keep in their reserves. We have covered the reasons for that in the past as well. The international sanctions and the restrictions on trade. Countries are trying to find new ways. They want to work outside the current system, which is dominated by the dollar. Usually, that means trading in their native currencies. China has been pushing the yuan for bilateral trade. India, too, has an arrangement with Russia, the rupee-ruble mechanism. India and Russia are using their own currencies to make payments. Instead of the dollar or the euro, alternative currencies are just one aspect of this trend. Central banks are stocking up on gold too. 2022 was a record year for gold purchases. Last year, central banks bought over 1,000 metric tons of gold, the highest since record-keeping began in 1950. So which central banks are behind the surge in gold purchases? Again, some familiar names top the charts: Russia, China and India. Central banks in these countries are beefing up their gold stocks. But how big are these reserves? What do the numbers say? I have some data. Earlier, gold had an 11% share in central bank reserves. Now this number has shot up to 15%. So there's an increase, but the dollar still remains dominant. 58% of the reserves with central banks around the world are of the greenback. This is a 20-year low, and despite that, more than half of the reserves are in the dollar. What should we make of this? In the short term, the dollar is still king. But foundations are being laid for a shift. The BRICS is leading the charge on this front. BRICS is an alliance of nations, and I'm talking about Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa. These are leading emerging economies, and they're thinking about making some bold moves. Recently, their foreign ministers met. They discussed the idea of a shared currency. The proposal was first floated by Russia. This happened during last year's BRICS summit. Now, the BRICS has sought some guidance.
We had one of the senior executives of the new development bank briefing our meeting on work that the bank has been doing, looking at the potential use of alternative currencies to the current internationally traded currencies, and looking at how we strengthen the arm of the BRICS Development Bank, and also ensure that we do not become victim to sanctions.
So serious deliberations are underway, but a shared currency is not an easy idea to execute. There's a need for direction and a roadmap. The specifics could be spelled out later this year, when leaders of BRICS nations meet in August for a summit. South Africa is playing host. We'll be tracking the developments for you. Now let's shift focus to Pakistan. It seems Pakistani politics is set to welcome a new player, the Istekam-e-Pakistan party. It was announced amid some fanfare. Who are the members of this new party? Mostly former Prime Minister Imran Khan's one-time loyalists. Yes, the new party is made up of former Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf party leaders. The head will be Jahangir Khan Tareen, or JKT. He's a former lawmaker and a billionaire sugar baron. Reportedly one of Pakistan's richest politicians too. He's also a man Imran Khan had personally appointed as PTI Secretary General. A lot of other former PTI leaders were present during the party's announcement. Fawad Chaudhry, Ali Zaidi, Mahmood Maulvi and more were present for the celebration. These are people who had defected from the PTI after May 9. That's when violence had erupted across Pakistan. It followed Imran Khan's arrest. The violence eventually spread to military buildings. And after that, one by one, the PTI leaders started jumping ship. They resigned, saying they respected and stood with the Pakistani army. Most also said they were taking a break from politics. It seems that break didn't last long. In the recent weeks, frantic meetings have been conducted. The former PTI members have been meeting their old colleagues. Those colleagues locked up in prisons. We reported on this recently. We also mentioned that Imran Khan was watching this scheme, the scheme being called Minus Imran.